Welcome, Linda and Mitch. Thanks for coming along again. I wondered if you could just introduce yourselves before we start and let us know kind of what you're up to these days.
Sure. Um, Linda Hayes. I am a professor emeritus of the University of Nevada, Reno. I've been retired for a couple of years, just doing some writing and speaking. So that's where I am.
Yeah, my name is Mitch. I work at California State University here in Los Angeles. And yeah, Linda and I have continued to work on lots of things. And yeah, I feel pretty like actively involved in elaborating on the work that we have done before and seeing where it takes us next. So I guess that's sort of what I'm up to as far as interbehaviorism goes.
Yeah, great. And I wondered if we could start by just laying out what is the interbehavioral position, if we could call it that, on psychology and psychological events. And maybe how does it differ? Because in your book, you kind of highlight how it differs from radical behavioral perspectives a little bit, and how it differs a lot from mentalistic ways of thinking about things. So I wondered if we could start there.
Just some clarity. Interbehaviorism is the philosophy, and interbehavioral psychology is the um, science part of the interbehavioral thinking. The philosophical perspective applies not only to interbehaviorism applies not only to psychological events, but to biological, physical, chemical events. It is a very broad technical philosophy, scientific philosophy. It's Interbehavioral psychology is peculiar to psychological events, and Mitch and I have been working on in both the philosophical and the psychological domains. Um, the primary difference between interbehavioral thinking and um, most other scientific thinking in psychological science is that interbehaviorism is a non-causal conceptualization. It's a field theory, and that really makes it quite different in many ways. I'll leave it at that, Mitch, if you want to kind of comment on what makes it different.
Well, there are two things. I mean, you wondered about mentalism and radical behaviorism, right? Just to make sure. Um, well, all behaviorisms in different ways are kind of a resistance against mentalistic ways of conceptualizing things and turn towards understanding the context as a way to understand behavior and not uh, not some kind of hypothetical construction that is inside of you somewhere that, we then blame and all of that. So there's a lot of commonalities. And then, as Linda mentioned, I think increasingly as we talk about differences between interbehaviorism and interbehavioral psychology, there are a lot of differences, but one is this that it from the start doesn't really place emphasis on one sort of factor as being a powerful thing to or a place where you should look first, or it doesn't kind of doesn't have that push on it like that. So um, that is the non-causal thing. But we could go down a whole um, you know, the philosophy of interbehaviorism really outlines its assumptions really clearly. I mean, there's a lot of really unique things about Cantor's work that Linda and I have spent a lot of time um, highlighting and that we think have a lot of implications for uh, the philosophical kind of foundation of what behavioral sciences are doing.
Yeah, that's a good point. And if anyone has that particularly access to academic articles, if they just search your names, there's
Um,
you two have done it a lot of you've published a lot on all of these areas, and I know your book is full of references to your work and other people's work as well around these areas that I think is really valuable and interesting. Um, so
I
that
think we
not
could spend the whole time talking about that, but I'll stop. There's a
yeah
systems
yeah
approach, to it. There's a lot of really unique things. So
yeah, but this non-causal piece or this looking at a field of interacting factors instead of trying to control for everything and figure out what causes something seems like one of the key parts.
Yeah.
You two started your book, and I'll admit I've most psychology books I've read lately are pretty like they start with something that hooks you and is exciting and tells you a story or cracks a joke or something and goes, oh, this is going to be fun. And then your book starts with like, what is science? And I was, I think the first time I read it, I probably skipped that chapter and went, I want to know what to do. Don't tell me what the foundations are. And then later, I've gone back and really appreciated that. So I wondered if we could talk through a bit of that, like what is science from your perspective?
Well, a fundamental operation of all sciences is observation. That's the principal observation. That's the principal activity, the principal operation is observation. And that's what it is from an interbehavioral perspective as well. Um, what that means, though, is that you have to be careful to distinguish what you're encountering, what you're in touch with, and what you're saying about it. Because what you're saying about it is something other than your contact with it, your non verbal contact with it. So there's a lot to be said about kind of distinguishing constructs from events. And I think that's something that all sciences have to be wary of, and that there's all kinds of confusions about that in science generally and in behavior analysis and other behavior sciences, that there is some confusion as to what we're saying about things and what we're actually confronting. So that's kind of an important feature of what science is. Science is being careful about that.
So the study of, you think you use the term confrontable events, um,
Yes. Mhm.
and that we're clearly distinguishing what is it what's actually happening versus what are we postulating or what are we
Yes.
theorizing
What,
about
what
it.
are we orienting to? Cantor uses the term orientation. What are we orienting to, and what are we saying about it? So there's, I mean, we can get into some sort of philosophical issues about whether or not there's a world there to be talking about and all that. But frankly, if you're going to be a scientist, you can't afford to go down that path because then you don't have anything to say. So to leave that aside for right now, there is a distinction being made between what one is orienting to and what one says about it. Mitch is laughing.
well, I love this topic, and I love so maybe well, I'll just add the one thing that is so cool. I mean, there's lots of cool things about interbehaviorism and the kind of what is science thing or kind of question that is being posed. But it's so Cantor's approach so reminds you that science is a job I mean, it literally says that, right? In the 1953 book, Linda Wright, Science is a Job. And maybe that seems obvious, right? But then there are lots of like kind of cool implications of that. Like it's a job done by a person, like who lives in a world and they're trying to figure things out, but there's some seriousness to it. There's a tr originality. There's some features of science that are different maybe from other types of work that Cantor kind of highlights in that way. But I like that there is a recognition that scientists are people, members of cultures, and there's kind of a humility that you're always figuring it out, and there's no end to it. And I am reminded of that a lot. And I think there are so many cool lessons in Cantor's kind of philosophical approach that I don't think I don't know if they're always appreciated like in the full way that they could be. So there's a lot there, but I think it's this reminder that it's a person interacting with a subject matter and trying to understand it. And as Linda reminds us, and assuming that there is a way to kind of get a closer understanding of it over time.
And there is, as Mitch is saying, it is a person with a cultural history as well as an individual history. So there's no truth about it. You're not seeking truth and you're not going to get to truth. Truth is not a scientific concept. So it's this humility that Mitch is talking about, that we are orienting to the world. We're talking about it. That's what we're doing.
Yeah. There are some good chapters right in that. I'm just thinking of this Logic of Modern Science book where there's stuff, like science isn't magic or it doesn't,
Right.
like it's like, oh, I did an experiment. So, it's not to trivialize any of that. I think research is really important. Um, but to like that's part of a kind of ongoing thing. It's not like that's the verdict, So I always like
Yeah.
being. I mean, I like being reminded of those lessons, and I like it right now actually too. It's a good thing to be reminded of.
And the more we
Yeah.
observe things, the more we are oriented to things, the more we know about them. So it's not as though it's a trivial kind of activity. It
Yeah,
accumulates. It's corrigible, but it accumulates. Um, so,
yeah,
Mm. Yeah, and I think in that book, excuse me, setting conditions. In that book, Cantor describes it as something like interbehaving with things in such a way that we increase our knowledge or we increase our understanding of the things, the relations between them. And I thought that's just such a nice, simple way of describing it as a job. And everyone should, if you're interested in this, you should read. That's the is it Philosophy of Modern Science by J.R. Cantor and
the logic of modern
The
science. Yeah.
Logic of Modern Science. That's right. And I love in that book how he switches between, he'll just be telling you something that I totally understand, and then he'll give an example that's like from particle physics or something, and then
Yeah,
there's all these
exactly.
formulas, and I'm like, man,
In another
what a
language.
he was. Yeah, he
Experimenter.
was clearly. I know you met him, Linda, but he was clearly just an incredible had an
Scholar.
incredible understanding of so many different things.
Yeah.
So, given that we're interested in confrontable events, and we need to be clear, like what are constructs and what are events, like what are the events of interest, like from your point of view, what are the events of interest in psychological science?
You want me
of
to
course.
have, well, we are talking about the actions of a whole organism, the organism as a whole. That's our level of analysis. We're not talking about the parts of the organism acting independently. That's biology. We're talking about whole organisms' interaction. with the environment. And that's what we're studying. Those are the events that, as a psychologist, we're interested in. So,
So not just what the brain does.
no, I mean, the
That's
brain's involved, but so's the big toe.
yeah, I know that was a joke, but yeah. Do you want to add anything to that, Mitch?
I don't know. I was just thinking I might not.
Yeah, it's a
That's it.
pretty good summary. So it's
Yeah.
just what do you think are some of the constructs in maybe mainstream psychology that are either invalid or like not helpful to our understanding of psychological behavior?
Boom, Mitch.
Okay. I mean, there are probably, I mean, lots of them. I think, the Cantor line, having thought about this a handful of times over the years, is that the constructs that are not derived from your context with events that kind of lean more towards um, your experiences that don't have to do with your contact with events, frankly, your kind of background or, mentalistic folklore that's floating around the world. Those ones, if we're talking about, a natural science of behavior, then those ones are less helpful because they don't help us focus on what we're trying to focus on as much as they could. So that's, I guess, what I'll say so far.
I mean, they're distracting from what there is to focus on, you know, sort of mental and spiritual and things of that sort that are not confrontable in the way we're talking about it, are not don't accumulate as an understanding. That's frankly how they've lasted as long as they have, because nobody's observing them. So our contact with them never changes. And we're saying the same things about spirits and mind as we were, a couple of thousand years ago. So that isn't helpful at all. Doesn't contribute to an ever evolving understanding of things.
Yeah, that's true, and especially when clients watch too much TikTok, it's like people come into clinic telling me all sorts of things that their brain is doing or that is causing this or that, and it's yeah, it could just be witchcraft, pretty much. So a good rule for people then is when you're considering something to sort of ask yourself, is this derived from the observation of things happening, or has someone taken a cultural idea and then imposed it onto what they're seeing?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I will just add maybe that you know, there's not a right one. So I have felt at times kind of I think it's good to talk about terms and how we talk about things because it influences how we orient to the world and what we focus on. I mean, I think it's really important. And I think it has to be kind of done with a little bit of a likeness. And, just like we were just saying about like, look, there's not like somehow that's the right one. I mean, that too has a kind of thing, an evolving feature to it. So, and I don't know that I've always felt that as much. Lately I've thought that more. So, and I think terms are used in different ways and by different people so there's a lot that could be said about saying things.
Yeah, this is true. It's easy to get caught up in it.
Very
Yeah,
poetic.
sometimes it
Very
can be,
poetic.
wait a minute. So I find lately I have noticed sort of when I see the like, oh, we're kind of getting into the right and wrong kind
Yeah,
of business
that's
here.
a good point.
And
Good.
that's not one that I want to get too
Mm.
into.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, so it's like it's maybe it's helpful to be able to think about what's the methodology behind a particular theory, um, but we're not doing religion. We're not arguing about what's the truth. We're just trying to figure out the best way forward. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and then
I think that
things could change too then. It kind of holds it a little, how you said things 10 years ago might be a little different than how you say it today. And
Right.
that wouldn't seem to be like a bad thing.
Yeah.
It would even seem good. Like, oh, neat.
yeah, yeah, that's
So
progress.
I know there's lots of conversations about terms and so
Yeah,
it's an interesting topic for sure. Researchers have terms, clinicians have terms. There are terms that are, metaphors. There's just, terms are really interesting. It's another thing we could probably talk about just for a whole. Language is
well,
fascinating.
yeah. Well, like let's get into some applied kind of ideas, or some not some applied ideas, but some interbehavioral psychological analysis of a couple of topics. Because you looked at remembering and forgetting. You looked at like closeness and conflict in relationships. You looked at like perspective taking within your book and analysis of feeling, and I just thought they were really helpful because when I talk to people about interbehaviorism, they'll often say, "Well, what do I do with that? If there's just a field of events, then they don't know what to do." And I thought your analyses and I think Cantor did this really well as well. Just really describe things in a really neat and clear way. And yeah, so I thought the analysis of feeling was really interesting from an interbehavioral perspective, and I wondered if you could just talk the audience through how or if you could describe feelings from a as behaviors from an interbehavioral perspective, and we can start from there.
It's a very interesting thing that Catter says about it. Um, if we consider that what we're doing is interacting with something in the world, and when we interact with things, oftentimes the what happens is the thing that we're interacting with changes in some way, or some feature of the setting or the environment changes as we interact with it. Something there changes, and what he says is that the impact of interacting with things is not always upon the environment. It's sometimes upon the organism who's interacting. So there's the organism who's behaving, and there's an environment that is stimulating. And some of the impact of that interaction is on the environment, and some is on the person. And feelings, from his standpoint, are actions that their impact is felt upon the organism. And it's kind of a very interesting way of looking at things. It's very unusual. It's a very unusual argument, but um, I've found it. I've thought about it, and it seems to make sense to me. I don't know, Mitch. You've looked at this as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
I mean, I'll, I think there's a lot of thing I'm thinking about this topic now, and it is a really unique analysis. This is a unique, like one of Cantor's many um,
Yeah.
cool,
Unusual
cool,
argument.
cool
Yeah.
places to go
Yeah.
into. Um, but I always remember the great, and maybe it's common sense, and I don't know, but just how that feeling events are prolonged. They
Yeah.
don't, it's like I'm not just they don't flip on and off. Like, they have some unique features that I think it's so useful, the conceptualization that, it's not turning on and off a lamp. It's, your feelings kind of are something that is happening. And they differ from a lot of psychological events in that way. And I'm sure that aligns with, people's experiences of, I can't just suddenly,
Be happy.
if I'm upset about something, I can't just, someone can't just say like, "Hey, snap out of it." I
Yeah,
mean, maybe that'll like get me to, do something, but I won't feel, your feelings don't do that.
yeah.
You can't just jump in and out of them. So I think there's some, unique lessons that, again, I think are just common to people's experiences in life. And all of us, probably know it's like, I'm tired, I'm upset. I can't just not be right now. I can be super aware of it, I suppose, and, decide what to do while I'm upset. And I know that that aligns with a lot of the kind of maybe act stuff and whatnot. So, I hope that people see connections to, I don't want to see these things as either or. And I think these can contribute to kind of how you understand how some of these things work.
I
Mhm.
think the thing that Mitch is talking about in terms of the sort of duration and no beginning, no abrupt beginning and end kind of thing to feelings and their kind of duration. The fact that they do endure over a period of time provides opportunity for substitution. So
Yeah.
feelings very often are related to all kinds of things because they go on long enough that all kinds of changes are occurring that become substitutive. And so they're rich in as a psychological event, they're rich with relations to other things.
I think that's a really, really cool, and that's a Linda observation, I think. I don't know that that's something that can't, that's a you thing. And I say that just to acknowledge how um, you have noticed how substitution develops in all these like cool
Yeah.
ways. And then if you're feeling a certain way for a long time, then lots of different things end up being associated with that. And then, later remind you of that by way of substitution. So it's how feelings sort of, and if we like stay in this topic, then that it's easy to get into the kind of space of like, I don't know why I'm feeling a certain way right now, but I'm really feeling it pretty strongly.
Yeah.
Well, something is here that you're interacting with that was probably around something, like you can see how all this sort of flows together conceptually. So, um, yeah, I love that you brought up this topic.
Good one.
Yeah, it's a favorite of
Can you
mine.
talk
Yeah.
a bit? Can you talk more about substitution, Linda, for people who aren't familiar with that idea, that
Um,
construct?
no, well, I mean, that's sort of a simplified way of talking about it is kind of like responding conditioning. You know, we acquire stimuli acquire the function, the active properties of other stimuli by virtue of them having occurred in the same space-time relation. And so a given, well, this is a distinction Cantor makes very clearly, a distinction between stimulus as objects and stimulus as functions. So um, a stimulus object can be home to multiple stimulus functions, stimulus actions, by virtue of a person acting with respect to it in a context where other things are present. So one thing becomes a substitutive for another thing. And so much of our lives are that so much of everything we do involves substitution of that sort. I'm kind of giving whirlwind here, Mitch, if you want to say
No, that's
something.
really great. I what I have to say beyond that, it's a really, really pervasive, process, and substitution being the outcome, kind of, but we are involved in an environment that has many things in it, and we are responding with respect to those things in lots of different ways. And later on, substitute stimulation, occurs, and that's a really unique part of our experiences. The past comes around with us in some ways, not in us, of course, but that's the unique part of psychological stimulation. I mean, that's the whole object. Things aren't just their object property. They don't just have their object properties. They are, psychological actions. So
Mm.
it has huge implications for lots of things.
Everything.
Yeah, lots
Everything's
of things.
psychological.
And most theories of language are all kind of handling that topic in different ways, I think.
That's what
From,
equivalence is about. That's what RFT is about. That's what, all of these things have the same kind of, they're talking about the same sort of thing.
Mm.
And
Mm.
people are talking about these things a lot earlier than they are now. I mean, these ideas have been around for centuries.
oh, I know. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah. And so if I can like summarize that, the what things mean to us is different than the thing itself. Is another
Historical.
way. Like, and I know a function could be like, I see a stick and I pick it up to do something with it, but it could. I think we're talking about it as like, I see a photo of my loved one, or I hear a. I drove past a cafe we used to go to together, and then the cafe kind of substitutes for that person, and I feel something that's connected with that person.
Yeah.
And so I think you described it in your book as, or one of your papers as, when things kind of co-occur in time or space, then there's these associations between them, and then or
The
we
association is
we
a
associate
thing.
them.
We don't
What's
actually
that?
associate. Well, I think it's important to clarify that association is not a verb in interbehavioral psychology. It is a condition of things being co-present. So we don't
Yeah.
actually associate, we don't relate. Those are not actions. I mean, there's a lot to be said about that I don't want to get into exactly right here, right now, but the tendency is to think that we're doing it, that we're associating, that we're relating. And that's not exactly how an interbehavioral thinking would be. The what is this? The association has to do with the conditions, not the action of the person.
Yeah, yeah. That's a
That's
really
that's
good.
an interesting It's interesting. We're just so used to saying, like, oh, they put it together or they figured it out, or, and then, it's just so common. We all
Yeah.
probably say those sort of things. So, if we stick to the kind of, analysis that we're sticking to, then you don't do that. The stimulus has developed different, functions. And so that's an interaction between you. It's always you interact in a, interaction with a stimulus. So
Mhm.
um yeah, it's an easy one to slip in just because there's so much history of talking about it in a different way. But for
I
the
just
concept of substitution, even when you said stick, I was imagining a stick. I
Me
mean,
too.
like that's an easy example of substitute,
yeah,
right? Like when
yeah,
you say a word, and
can see it. Yeah.
you can see an object by way of, I mean, I can say bear, and you'll think of a bear, like, and it's just a sound that I'm making. So that's kind of how. words carry so much with them. They're not just words. They have their
Just
whole
more.
history.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, so I was thinking of an example, and I looked out my window and I can see my grass, and then there's often sticks out there, so that made me think of a stick. And then I actually was picturing a magpie because I'm in Australia. We don't have any bears, but we have like
Oh,
birds that attack us. It's way better. Um, so yeah, all that kind of happens. I love that, Linda, that pick up on like we associate versus there's a the setting or the condition is, and
It's
I
in
think
the field.
it's a really good example of the within interbehaviorism you've got the say the or stimulus function response function with a double-headed arrow. So it's a and that's the my understanding is that's the interbehavioral is it's not we're not just doing stuff to the world, but the world
It's
is like
yeah,
we're
that's the unit. There's only one thing. It's not two things. It's those stimulating and responding is one thing.
yeah. And I was reading Noel Smith, The Myth of Mind last night, and his example for feelings was like if you win the lottery and then you jump up and feel excited, then the the feeling is an interaction to the thing felt about. He described it as the lottery win. So there's this event, and then you're interacting with it, but it's interacting with you at the same time, sort of. And
Hmm.
yeah, that seems
yeah,
like all right. But yeah, it's a
yeah,
great
it's
example of you could see how someone like, are we just being technical? I mean, I always think like, just again, at the end of the day, you don't want to fall into like, oh, Linda didn't relate that correctly, and we need to try harder to get her to relate things or to stop relating things. It's just too quick for it to fall into blaming the person for what's going on. And you want to like, at the beginning of this whole behavioral adventure, that was one of the things that brought many of us to it, right? Is that we didn't want to do all that, or we didn't think that that led us in a good direction. So I
mm,
always feel
mm. And
connections
yeah,
to the beginning there.
It's very hard to talk about interbehavioral psychology and interbehaviorism in a situation like this because it's so it's there's so much to say. I mean, it's so big. It's hard to know where to begin or how to characterize it so that somebody could understand it or somebody could relate to it. It's I find it kind of hard to do that.
yeah, yeah. And then when I understand it, it seems so simple in a way. But then when I try to talk about it, it's yeah, I just sound like I'm rambling. So you two do much better, but yeah, I think
You're asking really good questions about it.
Yeah.
another really I thought really interesting thing you looked at in the book, and I know you've got another paper on it. I can't remember if it was together or if it was yourself, Mitch. Was around perspective taking. Um,
Sure. And with our colleague Genevieve, that perspective taking in particular, yeah.
if we've got, I'm sure we've probably mostly got people who are interested in act and things like that who'll be watching this. Can you talk a bit about perspective taking as a continuum and how you kind of thought about it in the book or in your work?
Well, Linda, I mean, I don't want to avoid responding, but I think there's an important precursor to all that work. And I think it's a one that, well, I want us to give a little attention to it. And it's this whole notion of shared history. And
Yeah.
it came out of your analysis of private events or not so private events. And
Yeah.
I think that I mean, I love that concept. So I think if you don't mind, can we do a quick kind of detour? Because
Sure.
without that, I mean, that opens up the door to kind of understand a lot of what's to come.
Do you want me to talk about it, or
That's,
I thought you were?
that's an invitation to you to talk about this kind of where this shared history, um, well, how that sort of started to be a thing in your work, because that's where that came from the private events analysis that you've been working on, and me too.
Um, well, one of the things that was problematic, I guess, about Skinner's analysis, this notion of private events. So everything interesting, all the complex things that anybody ever did, and their thoughts and imaginings and memories and everything else, they were all private. And of course, that didn't make any sense. And so how the issue became how do you know what somebody else is thinking, and how would you know, how do you observe things that appear to be private? Well, you know, this is going to take too long, Mitch. You're gonna why don't you pick it up from here? It's going to take
Well, I mean,
a real
you can
start.
respond with respect to someone's, thoughts and other private events, other allegedly private events, by way of having a shared history with them. And so, you know, I think we just don't want to overly paraphrase it, and I feel that too, Linda. But it,
Two people who have known each other for a long time. They like two old people who live together. They finish each other's sentences, and they know what the other person is thinking because they have observed overt behavior in the presence of certain stimulation, and they know how that person reacts to that, and so they can observe the behavior of someone that is very subtle because they share that history, because they respond similarly to stimulus events because of a history in which those have been present. In other words, what appears to be private is not private. It's subtle, it's fleeting, it's individual. But you can know it, you can observe it by virtue of a shared history. And the issue of a shared history is something that Mitch has been developing in terms of relationships. So sort of
yeah,
kind
I mean, just from, I think it's such an important kind of, and it's interesting because the sequence is really great in here because the substitution concept is really important to this. So really, you observe all these things by way of substitution. But if you don't have that concept in your analysis, then those things have to stay hidden.
yeah,
That's what allows all those things to, okay, so if a stimulus object is not just a stimulus object, psychologically speaking, we know that words are not just sounds, right? I mean, so we can take that further, which again, this is a great analysis of kind of taking, or an example of taking the substitution idea further. Then um, the more elaborate a history I have with someone, the more I can observe what would otherwise maybe be considered a private event. And I think maybe, to make a point of this, and I think it was probably the notion of private events that kind of got this analysis or brought it out. But that aside, I don't know that we get a lot of, you know, people want to really, I think people are pretty interested in the concept of private events, I'll say, and that for different reasons, it's kind of sustained. But then it's pretty from there, if you have this shared history kind of concept or kind of elaboration of substitution, then you can see how failures to have a shared history could result in, you know, failures to engage in perspective taking. And that, what sorts of histories would result in you, um, you know, engaging in perspective taking or feeling closer to someone. Or, I think it's interesting when people are like, they just sort of get me. Well, they probably are responding with respect to your subtle behavior in some way that you don't even have to say it. What a relief that is when someone understands you. But when they understand you, it's because they have a shared, you see, it's not a matter of the burden being that you have finally said everything and now they understand it. You know, it's more experiential than that. So I think this is another thing that like I was kind of just connecting like the analysis of feelings to that, then kind of it aligns with technique wise, like kind of the thing that people are trying to do, I think, in bringing about behavior change in different ways. So I think it's been a neat, um, it's been a cool project, I will say, an ongoing project on in relationships and perspective taking. And you know, it turns out relationships are pretty important
Yeah.
in life. So I've been pretty interested in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good example of the construct of private events. Maybe like you can see how people kind of get to that, but it then precludes any analysis of what's going on if you just see it as private or limits it at least. Um,
Yeah,
and
it does.
and yeah,
Sorry,
I
Linda?
love that. What were you going to say, Linda?
Yeah.
That the the concept of private events has limited our understanding of complex human behavior. It hasn't helped it at all. And so the sooner that we can try to make sense of subtle, fleeting kind of behavior, uh, the better.
Yeah, and that
Another thing we could talk about
And
for a whole, yeah.
shared
and the
substitution.
yeah. So when people have that shared history, they might be substituting or responding to substitute
Yeah,
stimulus in the similar or same way.
In some ways, I'm having the feeling with you
Mm.
then. I'm having the thought with you. It's
Yeah,
not just a thought, it's my thought with you. I mean, you know, it's if it gets really relational and I think that the analysis of substitution and shared history um, provides a way to talk about that that doesn't seem so I don't know,
yeah, yeah. And
conformed.
I was just thinking as you were talking, if I walk into a car park and I see a car with a smashed windscreen, I might feel bad for that person and think, ah, that's that sucks. If I'm walking with my partner and I see their windscreen smashed and we walk in together, I'm probably going to respond to that in a similar way to them, and we're going to share that, even though they don't have to say to me, I feel really upset about that. I just see it and respond in the same way because there's this shared history. It's
Yeah, or you can kind of uh, understand how they're thinking and respond with respect to them, you know, in a way that kind of has this you get me or you kind of, so I think there's a
you
lot
know
of
what
value. Sorry?
what I'm thinking. You know
Yeah.
what a person is thinking.
I was
mm,
just thinking in your example, I don't know what part of it, but it reminds me, I can remember when we've like fully, there were moments. So all these are kind of flashbacks to times where we've talked about these at length with different people. And so this is kind of fun for a variety of reasons. But, people say, well, you can never know exactly what I'm thinking. And it's such a great point. And it's an interesting conceptual one too. And because you will never fully have, you're never going to be me.
Yeah,
I will
your history.
always be,
Yeah,
I will always be a unique, you can share some parts of it, and people share different his parts of their lives with different people, and you can kind of do all sorts of analyses of things of who do you want to be able to observe what, or feeling like people are too close and people kind of, so there's, it's always going to be a kind of project for you to get to know someone because they will always have a part of their life and their history that was not yours and
Right.
similar to you. So, and that will continue, to be forever. So it's an interesting part of it. And, we can talk about secrets and lying and all sorts of individuality and fun topics that, again, the um, shared history kind of way of speaking, I think allows for all sorts of cool places to go.
Hmm.
Love that.
Within that, we haven't talked about implicit responding, and that well, we have talked about it. We haven't named it. Can you just explain what that means and how that relates to? I think does that relate to substitute
Yeah.
stimulation? I'm trying to. Yeah.
Is, is, but for Cantor, it's doesn't really talk about implicit responding so much as he talks about an implicit field. And an implicit field is one in which a person is responding to substitute stimulation. So when we talk about uh, sort of implicit things, that term is really kind of it means indirect, it means substitutive, it means something of that sort. It doesn't mean much more than
Yeah.
I would say.
So, so it's just responding
I'm
to
so happy
something that's indirectly kind of. What were you going to say, Mitch?
I was just
Substitutive.
so happy that Linda answered this just because it's a hard, I guess this question, which is a good one, always reminds me that in interbehavioral perspective, actually stimulation and responding are one thing. And it gets close to, you said we've sort of talked about it and not named it because we can't talk about stimulation without talking about, I mean, you, stimulation and responding are so unitary that it's hard to talk about them separately. And I'm not good at it.
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, the what is given stimulating and responding being the same thing. It's not, that's a function. That's one thing. It's not one thing and another thing, each interacting with the other. It's one thing, a function. The only other thing to talk about then, with respect to that, is the setting. But the setting is different for everyone because the setting is historical. So what is present in the setting for me is different than it is for you because what's present in the setting is your history. So I don't really know where I'm getting on that, except that um, that I was trying to. There's no kind of special thing about implicit responding. It would be just substitution. That's that's all that it would be. I don't know. I'm kind of
Yeah,
not sure I'm
yeah,
making
yeah,
sense here, but
yeah.
no.
There's probably one bit I read that I hadn't quite got, but it's maybe because it's not.
It's
It's
hard.
captured in the rest of it. Yeah. But when you said that, I think for me, even hearing it now, that stimulating responding is just one. It's one event. It's one thing. But when we analyze it, we look at the like in a sense, we
Try
we
to
talk
yeah.
about it as different things to analyze it.
Yeah, because we want to talk about the form of we want to talk about form, we want to talk about origin, we want to talk about things of that sort that make us focus on the sources of responding and the sources of stimulation. But those sources are really they're not the unit. The unit is the function. So um
Mm.
but I think what is missing in most of behavioral psychology is the um, is that unit. And I think what people are talking about when they're talking about causality is the setting. They're always talking about the setting, but they think the setting is different from the stimulus because they don't recognize that the stimulus is part of the response. So it's kind of there's a different way of understanding things from an interbehavioral perspective. Um, I don't know. I feel like I'm not making sense here, but
What I guess what I'm hearing is everything is a part of one event. It's just, and when we, and I think even when I think I'm thinking into behaviorally, I still sometimes think about the setting as if it was separate from the the rest of the field, or I think about the stimulus functions as if they're like floating out there on their own and they're doing something separate from the rest. And I think, but I think when you're explicitly saying it's one integrated field and then trying to interpret it, you can stay kind of clearer on that. Whereas a lot of behavioral, well, a lot of psychological science is not, it's not clear. Um, yeah,
yeah,
no.
I think in most behavior science, um, the stimulation is not differentiated from the setting. Um, and so which makes it seem that that stimulation is separate from responding and can be responsible for responding. But if stimulation is the same thing as responding, then it obviously can't be responsible for responding. And since the setting is there, it doesn't make anything happen. It is simply the context in which this is going on that can't be responsible for responding either. So that's what gives you the field.
It's just that was so I was that was really a very good analysis of those things. I was enjoying that. Just, as soon as you start talking, then things become parts. And, I mean, there is something about talking about things that automatically cuts it up. And
Yeah.
so there's a tendency to, once we start doing that, to have this sort of um, non-field like, as we like to think about it, kind of way of being. So I always notice that sort of. I think the value is to be very sensitive to that. And yeah, there's lots of ways a whole thing could develop, as Linda was just alluding, like if you weren't really paying attention to that and you confuse this and that, then you could develop a whole theory that focuses on this, doing that to that, when actually this and that were not different things. Like
Yeah.
it's an interesting sort of conceptual thing that we're working on.
Mm-hmm.
At the level of technique, I think we've been trying to think about how these things can all be
Yeah.
uh, integrated and maybe rethought in a way that is helpful, because it's certainly not that, you don't add something to a situation, or, develop a new history, or, uh, so anyway, it's a
I think yeah, everybody, when they kind of come across interbehaviorism and interbehavioral psychology, they, like you said, right from the beginning, well, what do I do with it? So what? What now? Well, research is all the same thing. You change something, you see what happens. You manipulate the field and you see what happens. That's what research is. So there's no difference in looking at interbehavioral research and any other kind of research. Research is that's all it is. Application though is complex, and I think you know uh, issues like understanding what history is. How do we look at history? How do we look at substitution? How do we look at feeling? How do we look at these concepts um, from an interbehavioral perspective has implications for application that I think are not well enough developed in terms of technique, in terms of practice. And I think Mitch has actually been working sort of
Yeah.
more recently and kind of looking at how does this analysis help us to do clinical work or to what are its implications for clinical work. And I think that's important because that is what people want to know.
And a way to kind of bring it all,
Yeah, yeah,
there's a lot of good stuff going on and a lot of good techniques. And,
yeah,
what we don't want to do is seem dismissive of that or something. There's a lot of really cool things. So I think that increasingly it's felt like this sort of work is also one to like, and I think for it not to just feel like some sort of toolbox, this should be a more cohesive conceptualization that doesn't, again, dismiss any of those things, but maybe it's connected to something that seems, yeah. So that's what we've been kind of working on lately, just back from a conference where there was lots of talk about this sort of thing. So,
Oh wow, that's cool. Well, I think we need to do another chat about the what you're learning about application or what some of the things happening in that space are for sure. One of the things I've kind of thought since learning more about this approach is that a lot of, as you say, there's a lot of cool techniques that people have discovered probably through just working with people and trying different things. And then when people come to describe what they think is happening within that cool technique, they often then understandably pull on existing cultural folklore or ideas
yeah,
that are reductionist or whatever, and then develop a theory around it. And then that kind of gets legs because maybe you can't you can't just have a technique that works. You have to be able to explain, or people think
yeah.
you
You
have
have
to
to
be able
be
to
able to.
explain why. But a lot of the,
it,
I think a lot of the, like I think of, I use a lot of ACT things in my work, and that kind of thinking about feelings and thinking and things like that. But if we could just like look at techniques and not have to know straight away what's going on and just analyze it, what's happening in the event field, I think there's so you could refine those techniques, but you could also describe them in much more concrete
Yeah,
ways.
yeah, I think so.
yeah.
Wow.
Much more consistent ways, coherent ways, I think.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
individualized, context specific, techniques aren't things that exist out there in the world, they're an interaction
Yeah,
between, two people usually in this, sort of area. So
Yeah.
I think that's really important. So the more you kind of get exactly what you're speaking to, kind of give all of that some kind of foundation, uh, then I think you can move through using those techniques in different ways and detour from them when that's important. And you know what I mean? I think there's a lot of good reasons um, to build upon that. And I think people are interested in that because the the the, the techniques and different strategies on their own are certainly not nothing, but they don't sort of uh, it doesn't work the same way. There's those are those are relational things happening.
Mm. Yeah. Well, look, one example in my work, I work a lot with people who've experienced trauma and abuse, often within their own homes. And when people understand substitute stimulation and the way, even after someone's left, that might be re traumatizing them because of furniture, the way the room's set up, the way, all kinds of different things in the physical environment. When people understand that and then find a lot of people instinctively will like move furniture around or get rid of that person's favorite couch or do all these kinds of things. But once they
Mm.
understand it and they can kind of
Yeah, it
use
makes
that
sense.
themselves, it's really empowering. But if I just said, yeah, there's your brain is traumatized, so it will keep doing that to you, for a while. It's it's not very helpful for them. Um,
Yeah, it's not very active.
and they're just kind of common sense things that we would do. Is like we change something, we move something, we kind of know that almost as people because we've had those experiences. But just putting language to that and people being able to claim that, I think is it's super powerful and simple. Um,
Both, both, um, both characterizing what practices are going on, as well as using of the sort of logic of interbehaviorism may to develop practices may help. Both understanding what is happening that is useful and that is working, and that's what the clinical world is doing. It's interesting to look at those practices from an interbehavioral standpoint, not to undermine them or to say anything bad about them, but also just to understand what is happening and how what is happening might be enhanced or what might be detracting from it when you look at it in sort of a detailed um, interbehavioral field way. I don't know. That would
mm,
be a hope for the application of interbehavioral psychology, I think.
mm, mm. Yeah. Well, I kind of think of it as like I think surgical hand washing was around before germ theory because people just found
Yeah.
like someone just found that worked. And then once we know the mechanism, then that enables us to use that in a whole bunch of different ways that we couldn't before. Um, but if someone had just said, "Well, soap's just magical because it was blessed by the angels or something," and we left it at that, then it's it doesn't really give us much to work with. I'm conscious we've gone probably a bit over what we'd said in terms of time. So and I know it's getting to Friday evening for you. In just wrapping up, can for people who are interested and who've stayed on this long, can you tell them where else they can find your work or learn more about interbehaviorism?
That's you, Mitch.
It is.
Yeah. Mitch knows where everything is.
I don't know that. Linda and I love doing promotional. It feels a little promotional. But I know people are interested in learning more about interbehaviorism, and for all the reasons we've mentioned today, um, we are interested in sharing information about interbehaviorism with people. You know that that book was written specifically for getting the first kind of, we made a very deliberate effort to say things to people to expose them to their kind of core interbehavioral ideas in that book, and also recognizing some, accessibility of different articles and all of that. So that was a pretty, I that book was written for people to uh, start to get, to really get a general orientation. So, short of feeling like I'm saying that's the place, I guess that is, if I'm answering the question, that's that art. That's the reason for that. I know. So say so. You were saying something, Linda.
No, yeah, I know what you're saying. It's like trying to hawk the book or something. Not really, but it is kind of where there's a, I mean, I can't think of another source that would be as comprehensive as that. And yet it's not meant to be highfalutin. It's meant to introduce people to the field. So
Yeah, I will. I'll produce. I'll promote the book since you two are struggling with it. It is really excellent. It breaks down the the ideas of interbehaviorism. It's got comparisons of what Cantor said and then translated into plain language. It's got study questions at the end of each chapter. So after you think you've read it and understood it, you can kind of go back and like recheck what you missed. And it's very heavily referenced. So if you particularly if you've got access to academic articles, if you want to go from there and look at other sources, there's a whole range of things that you can check. And I think you did a really good job of concretely laying out the differences between this position and some other positions, explaining invalid versus valid philosophy, the role of philosophy within the sciences, and then applying it to, we've talked about some of it, you also applied it to remembering and forgetting, and other areas. And yeah, for me, this was the first interbehavioral book that I read, and I've read a couple of Cantor books since, and a couple of Noel Smith's books. Another one that's floating around is Modern Perspectives on J.R. Cantor, which I think you
Good.
you
Yeah,
read a
yeah, yeah,
chapter
yeah.
for that. Um,
Read it.
there's if you search into behaviorism, there's a website that's got a few sort of out of print books that you can get. They've got PDFs and things like that. So look around.
Yeah,
Um,
places to get. There are places to get Cantor's books still. Um, so
yeah,
if
Principia still has some, and yeah, and particularly I
um,
think if you're in
and
the
I have
US, you
kind of
can get.
secondhand bookstores or because if you just sort of go online and you try to find some secondhand Cantor books, you can find them and you can find a lot of them, and they're very cheap usually if you find them. Like, mm, I'm saying this, and I haven't done that for a few years, so maybe it's not as available as it once was, but um,
yeah, they're reasonable or very expensive. Yeah.
yeah, there's a couple of them that are like way out, but most of them are cheaper.
Yeah, yeah. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Linda and Mitch. It's been great chatting this morning. Really appreciate your time and hearing the breadth of your knowledge and understanding in the area. And thanks everyone for watching. If you've got this far, I will put a link to your book in the description when I publish this, and put a few other sources in there that people can check out. Thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Linda and Mitch.